Good evening and welcome to Talking the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host, coming to you from the BNN Live studios, Eggleston Square, Jamaica Plain, where tonight on the Boston Neighborhood Network, we'll bring you a two-part show. First up tonight, this Saturday marks the 40th anniversary of the still famous, and some would say infamous, U.S. District Court decision, Morgan versus Hennigan. The end result, forced busing to remedy segregation in the city of Boston. Tonight, joining me from the Union of Minority Neighborhoods, the director of the Boston Busting Desegregation Project, Donna Bevins, and an intern from there who's learning some valuable lessons in this whole process and hoping that many people in Boston will as well. That's Steve McDonough. Then on the second half, well, casino gambling isn't quite as popular as it used to be, or so says the latest Boston Herald poll. Tonight, the chairman of an organization seeking to repeal the three-year-old law and hoping to convince the Supreme Judicial Court to let them put a question on the ballot that could result in repeal of casino gambling. John Ribeiro joins us from Repeal a Casino Law. All that and more tonight on Talking the Neighborhoods. All right, we're back with Talking the Neighborhoods. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Tonight, a two-part show, and in this first half, remembering the anniversary coming up this Saturday, 40 years since the famous decision handed down by U.S. District Court Judge W. Arthur Garrity, Morgan versus Hennigan. The end result, forced busing to remedy segregation in the Boston public schools, and the start of a tumultuous era in the history of Boston. And tonight, organization, a woman who is helping to remember what happened and helping others to remember as well, in the hope that it informs their decisions going forward. I'm talking about Donna Bevins. She is the director of Boston Busing Desegregation Project, put forth by Union of Minority Neighborhoods. Also joining us, a young man who's learning some lessons through this process, an intern for the Union of Minority Neighborhoods, Steve McDonough. And I want to thank you both for coming in tonight. Donna, nice to have you here. Thanks for coming back. Steve, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming in. Well, why don't we start off on this note? And Donna, tell us what you remember, because you're asking people out there to kind of dredge up some memories, and some of them are painful, many of them are, and tell us what you remember from back 40 years ago. Of course, you were a young woman at the time, but you must have a lot of thoughts about this.
I was a young woman at the time, and I just moved to Boston in 1974 after graduating from college. In a lot of ways, that era, both the Morgan v. Hennigan decision and the Brown v. Board of Education decision, which we also just recently celebrated the 60th anniversary of, really framed my whole life, because a lot of who I was coming out of segregated or black communities in both South Carolina and in Dayton, Ohio, coming to Boston was my introduction to desegregation. And so what I remember was a lot of confusion, a lot of different things. For one thing, it was a time of a lot of the movement for liberation of African American people, and everybody was starting to get into the movement for liberation.
Right.
And it was also a time of turmoil in the city, because as the desegregation process kicked off, there were places that you felt that you couldn't go, so it was a sort of scary time in that way. And at the same time, I was meeting a lot of people across many lines of difference, and having, just being introduced. It was really my introduction to adulthood.
Well, and of course, what an introduction it was. Most people don't need reminders of, many of the aspects of what took place afterward, and including riots, rock throwing, spearing of people, some really nasty incidents that some people suggest that still to this day has left a mark on either the psyche or the reputation of the city of Boston. As a young woman coming here, of course, you must have heard somewhat of Boston's history and housing segregated, schools largely segregated. How did that shape you going forward, and how did you get here 40 years later with the Boston Busing Desegregation Project?
Well, it was really profound in the ways that shaped me. I think that coming to Boston, first I was went to college just outside of Boston, and like I said, this was my introduction to predominantly white environments, and so really, in a lot of ways, I think, you know, my work on understanding racism and systemic racism and understanding some of the class analysis of my life, it really shaped my whole work history in terms of really trying to help people to understand systemic racism, to understand how class works for us and against us, and to do that so that we can have, you know, not just better relationships one-on-one, but really deal with some of the recurring patterns in our history and the recurring power dynamics that are really founded in our lack of understanding of those issues of systemic racism and of, you know, of some of the class issues that face us.
Well, a lot of things have changed in that time, but some things haven't, depending upon who you talk to. And of course, some people say in the era of you know, President Obama, Governor Deval Patrick, that we're in a post-racial society, I think is the term that's commonly used. And yeah, I'm kind of curious of your thoughts. Did we learn any lessons? Did we really learn any lessons from that era?
Well, yes, for some of us, yes and no, and that's the thing. That's what we learned some things about it, but as we've worked on the project, what we've really come to see is that there's so much more to learn, and you don't learn history once and for all. You know, as you move away from it, and as we see how things change over time. We have to keep going back and deepening our understanding of history, of our own story for one thing, and of our history for another. And the two are really combined. So as we've asked people questions, we've learned not just more about individual stories, but how they connect their stories to their own histories, the histories of their communities, of their people, and a lot of times not having the space to really reflect on the relationship between the two gets in the way, because we keep telling the same story to ourselves, and we're not sort of hearing other stories and really coming to a larger understanding of some of the things we've gone through.
Tell us about the project and how that got started and kind of where you've taken it. And then I want to bring Steve in and really quiz him on some of this now.
Well, the project started with some organizing that Union Minority did, first around quarry reform, around the criminal records reform, and then around getting Black parents more involved in the schools. And in both cases, these stories of desegregation kept coming up in different ways. You know, people would tell the stories, they call it the elephant in the room, and so UMN decided that it needed to investigate it and find out why this kept coming up. So the first thing that we did was we asked other people, we said, we keep hearing these stories. Do you think it's important to go back and look at this history?
Stories that raise questions about?
Stories about what people had gone through, stories of anger at the Boston public schools, stories of teachers, and they weren't all negative stories, but that era kept coming up. Stories of the community that, in the Black community, a lot of times people said it was so much more vibrant back then, and there's so much more going on in terms of really understanding what was going on politically and what we were looking for.
More cohesion.
Yes. So people kept talking about this, and so we asked them, do we need to look at this? Is this still, do we need to go back? And basically what we heard back at first was, yes, look at it, but look at how it relates to today. Don't just do it as a history lesson that we sort of put in some archives, but really think about what it has to do with today. So then we used a film, Can We Talk, to ask people, what does this have to do with today? How is this relevant today? And we showed the film. We did community, what we called community context setting. So we looked in the Latino community, Asian community, because we also felt that we didn't have those stories necessarily. We looked in the Black community and white communities. And we asked people, what is the relevance? And there were three things that we kept hearing that we picked out from what we were hearing, of things that they said were what Morgan v. Hennigan was about. There's still issues that we struggle with today. And
they were?
Those things were race and class equity. How do we really get to race and class equity? And a lot of the stories were about race and about class and neighborhoods and that kind of thing. Then the other one was democratic access, like access to resources, access to safety, access to any number of things. So we were looking at how do we have a democratic access so that we're all having access to the things that we need. And then finally, both then and now, processes of demanding excellence from not just schools, but from public institutions. Different communities had different needs around that. How do you make demands of public institutions? And again, like in some communities, it was much clearer and more vibrant back then than now. And so we still saw difficulties, but that was what it was about then, and that's some of what we have to grapple with today.
Well, and of course, now I know you have a big event coming up this coming Thursday in the Boston City Council chambers, I think, kind of asking people to come and share in a very public way their thoughts and feelings on it. Correct me if I'm wrong, 4 to 6. Anybody can come to that and
Anybody. It's open to the public. And we're trying to make the statement just to commemorate that this is 40 years. And this is a history that Boston doesn't have to hide from. It's something that we really need to talk about. And it's also a history that doesn't just involve people who were here then. It involves people who weren't born then. It involves people who weren't here then and who are here now. And a lot of times when we've done what we call story circles, when people have heard this history, it's helped them to understand some things about Boston.
Well, and a perfect segue to bring Steve McDonough. And Steve, you've been working as an intern with the Union of Minority Neighborhoods on this project. What have you learned? Did you get any life lessons out of this? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of knowledge there, but what did you get from this experience?
I think I've gotten a lot from this experience. I think one of the biggest things was that, well, first of all, I grew up in Quincy, and I think taking American history 3 or 4 times in the schools there and never once learned about the desegregation crisis, the busing crisis, and basically the biggest thing that this project, I think I've learned from it is that, when I was in school, I think we got the sense that somehow the history of more than 10, 20 years ago somehow had no connection to
no relevance.
Yeah, no relevance to what we were living in today. And working with Donna and working on this project and listening to everybody's stories, you get to see just how alive the history still is and how relevant it is to everything we do today and how it connects to your personal story.
Well, not everybody looks back at that fondly, and I'm not, as a matter of fact, some people say, busing to achieve desegregation was really a failure. And I'm playing a little devil's advocate here, but saying, guess what? Today, many of the Boston public schools are de facto segregated, and that they're overwhelmingly people of color. And so do you get any reaction from people here, negative reactions?
We get negative reactions, and we hear that some from people, and we hear people say that they wish they hadn't gone through it in terms of some of the trauma that they went through. But people also remind us and tell us that it also meant the end of basically a legal apartheid system that we had in the United States. So it was a huge transition for the United States, going all the way back to Brown. And so, you know, there are many...
Bitter tonic or no, it was necessary?
Right, well, we did what we could, what we knew to do then. One person said, I asked her, who'd been an activist back then, I said, is there anything that you, if you knew then what you knew now, that you would do differently? And she said, no, I didn't know then what I know now. You know, but she
Not
could...
possible.
Exactly, but she could look back and really make decisions now based on what she's learned through going through that period. And so, and there's you know, but this isn't the only project on history going on in Boston. There's so much history in Boston, people looking back at that history. But often with this, it's still so raw for people that we feel that we don't want to talk about it. But there's so many things that are sort of repeating patterns throughout our history in Boston and in the country, that if we don't look at it, we just keep repeating the same patterns. Like a lot of things that came up with the recent school assignment process, there are so many things that we're just like listening and hearing, that some of the same issues, even the same terms were coming up. But we weren't looking at, okay, well, this is how it looked back then, and how does it look now, and what does that mean for the choices that we're making? And so when that happens, we keep making choices, and the same thing happens, and we don't look back together enough to learn something new about why we keep getting the same results.
Well, and you know, I found interesting. You know, you're talking about, you know, empowerment, and you know, one of your third goal, so to speak, in starting the project. And in some ways, well, of course, many more people, many more classes of people, certainly races of people, are much more empowered. But in some ways, when you look at the schools, you know, people don't seem to be as engaged sometimes as maybe they should be. You know, what's that old phrase about what makes good schools? Well, you know, parents actively engaged, and of course that, the effect, and maybe, you know, it was worth it. As I said, bitter tonic or no, you know, it was medicine that was needed, yet the end result seemed to leave kind of everybody dissatisfied. Maybe I'm, you know, misstating that, but you know, I get that from all different kinds of people, no matter, you know, what race, class, neighborhood of the city. No one seems to be happy with the schools.
Right, and I have to say, having worked on the project, there's so much to learn about what's going on with public education. And some of the issues with public education aren't just about public education. They're about much larger social, political, economic issues that we as a city, as a nation, are grappling with. And so, to me, that's one reason that it's hard for, you know, for parents. I just marvel at parents to get involved. You know, first of all, so many parents are working, you know, such long hours to make ends meet, you know. And I mean, there's just so many issues that affect parents. And there's so many issues in terms of public education. Even, and that's the thing about looking back at the history and helping each other to understand it. Understanding public education now is really hard. I mean, you know, I've been doing it.
So many moving parts now.
So
you know.
many moving parts.
And finance, but I guess my point is, we've got just a couple minutes left here, and are people finally starting to get it? You know, in terms of what it does take to, you know, really kind of make a difference, not just in schools, but in their lives, in their neighborhoods. Are you getting a sense that we're making real progress? It might have taken us 40 years, but we getting there?
We're getting there. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of, and a lot of people are doing a lot of work, but it's very complicated. And I think we can do it together. I think a lot of times with a complicated issue like this, we sort of don't want to hear certain voices. And sometimes those are the very voices that we need to bring in order to figure out why we keep going through the same things again and again.
Sometimes there's reminders. I understand that the Boston City Council incredibly was not willing initially, at least, to recognize the significance of this anniversary, and perhaps that's something you'll be addressing more. This Thursday, again, is the event, Boston Busing Desegregation Project. They're asking people who want to share their memories, their thoughts, the lessons to be learned from the Boston busing crisis and the desegregation order that was issued by the U.S. District Court. W. Arthur Garrity. Steve, what lessons are you taking home from this? Has it inspired you to do something different with your life and how you approach it?
I think it's just been a constant learning process of how to think about history and how to think about the issues that we're dealing with. I mean, we're talking about W. Arthur Garrity, and I think one of the things that we're trying to focus on the project is it's not just about that decision, but also the 20 years between 1954 and 1974, all the work that went up leading up to that decision.
What prompted it? Yes. Yeah. Well, good thoughts. I want to thank you both for coming in, Steve.
Thank you very
much. And of course, Donna Bevins from the Union of Minority Neighborhoods. Again, this Saturday, the 40th anniversary of the decision, Morgan versus Hennigan. The decision that culminated with busing to achieve desegregation in the Boston schools, an interesting point in history, and lots more lessons to be learned. Thank you both for coming in and sharing with us.
Thank you for having us.
When we come back with more of Talk to the Neighborhoods, we'll shift gears back to some state and local politics. This time, casino gambling. It seemed like 3 years ago, after much debate, it was a done deal, a sure thing. Well, perhaps not. Joining me in the next segment, the chairman of the effort to repeal the casino gambling law, John Ribeiro from East Boston, joins us to talk about their efforts, their hopes to convince the Supreme Judicial Court to allow them to put a question on the ballot this fall that would perhaps repeal the law. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Tonight, a two-part show. In the second half, we'll talk about casino gambling. It's not nearly as popular as it once was, at least that, according to the latest poll numbers, actually in a couple different polls showing that a majority of residents may be opposed to the law that was passed 3 years ago. Well, some would say it's too late. Of course, the State Gaming Commission is right in the midst of a process to select at least 3 casino operators in different parts of the state. One slots parlor. And in the midst of all of this comes a campaign to attempt to repeal the law. And joining me tonight, the man who's chairing that effort. He's from Winthrop by way of, with some East Boston roots. He is the chairman of the Repeal the Casino Deal Committee, and I'm talking about John Ribeiro. And John, nice to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Well, where did this come out of, this campaign? Was this suddenly something that just kind of popped up? I mean...
Some would have you believe so, but as far back as 2010, when the first iteration of this bill actually made it to the governor's desk, we were making plans to repeal the law. And when the law was finally signed in 2011, we attempted to repeal the law then. It gets into some technical details, but we were unable to do so because it contained appropriations language, which is just budgeting language. So we waited until this next available moment, which is now, to put this on the ballot for November. So we started this process almost 4 years ago.
Well, yet now first the Attorney General, and now, of course, some others as well, saying it is too late, that the casino operators or those that are applying have expended, a lot of money, and it's a contractual matter, I think is the language they're using. And of course, the Attorney General refused to approve it as a ballot issue. First of all, were you surprised by that? And where does that leave you? I understand it's before the Supreme Court now, and give us the timeline.
Yeah, it actually came as a complete shock because, as I mentioned, we had been in discussion with the Attorney General's office since 2011 about attempting to repeal the law. And what the process we are following is an initiative petition process, and people will, be familiar with the idea of questions being on the statewide ballot, and you'll see, people out with signs, vote yes on this question and vote no on that question. So we are following that same path. And we submitted language last August to make casino gambling illegal, in essence. And what the Attorney General said was that not that we couldn't take away the licenses, but that we couldn't stop the application process. And that is, that the applicants had paid money, had filed their applications, and were entitled to a judgment on the application. In fact, the Attorney General goes on to say in her decision that once the licenses are handed out, there is no such protection for the casino developers. So if we were to wait until the casinos were all built and up and running, then she'd have no objection to us taking this forward.
The irony, were you surprised at that? You said you talked to her, and of course, there is a tradition in this state of ballot questions, some very far-reaching ones that we're still feeling to this day. But was that a political decision on your part, or do you think?
We respect the Attorney General. We think she got it wrong at this point. We were very surprised. It seemed to come out of the blue, and even in open court, Peter Sachs, the Assistant Attorney General, conceded to the fact that the casino developers had brought this issue of it's called an implied contract, that an implied contract exists with the application process very late in the approval process. So it was the Wednesday after Labor Day that we learned our fate, that it had not been approved to go on the ballot.
Right, nearly a year ago. And of course, what's happened since then, of course, you've gone forward. You've not only gone forward with running up to the edge, so to speak, but you've organized a serious campaign as well.
Yeah, and actually this would be the first time in history that a question has been denied certification by the Attorney General in Massachusetts, and that the group has still gone on to collect the necessary first round of signatures and forced it into the court's hands.
What's that process? Help us to understand
Sure.
that, because I know there's a big deadline coming up within a couple of days, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. So what happens is after that decision is rendered in the fall, most petitioners are allowed to start collecting signatures back then, and the number's around 70,000. We, at that point in time, had to go to court, seek an injunction to be issued our petition. So we were set back about 10 days before starting our collection then. So we had to go through, and we collected, in the midst of all the fights that were going on about casinos around the state, we still were able to collect over 70,000 certified signatures then. And what happens at that point is the language of the law gets submitted to the legislature just as if a legislator had submitted it.
Right.
They don't act on it, which is normal, and then we now have to go out and collect an additional 11,500 certified signatures.
So if they don't act upon it,
that's right,
within a certain time frame.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of the petitions that are seeking to be on the ballot also face a deadline of this Wednesday to turn into local city and town halls, each one independently, 11,500 certified signatures.
Will you make it?
We will definitely make it. We're over 20,000 raw signatures now, and that's going to put us in good stead in terms of certification. Where we have folks right now, as we speak, packaging and getting ready to mail those out to cities and towns. So we're very confident that we're going to meet that threshold, and we'll then just be waiting for the highest court in Massachusetts, Supreme Judicial Court, to decide whether we should be on the ballot or not.
And that will come when?
That needs to come by July 9th so that the Secretary of State can decide what number we will be, and to start printing the ballots.
So you could be put on the ballot. Again, John Ribeiro is the chair of the committee to repeal the casino deal, the law providing for casino gambling in Massachusetts passed now some 3 years ago, and the State Gaming Commission about to issue its first licenses, perhaps out in Western Mass first, but certainly a heated competition in the greater Boston area between a proposal for Everett and another for now Revere. And joining me to talk about it further is John Ribeiro, the chair. Again, well, were you surprised at the poll numbers? I mean, you've got to believe in what you've been doing, or else you couldn't move forward. And my God, you got 70,000 signatures now. Another, what, 10 to 20?
That's right.
That's an awful lot of people. Yet, after so much debate for so many years, the law passed rather easily at that time.
Sure.
And perhaps that was a reflection of the economy at the time. But were you surprised at the numbers? The Boston Herald poll, give me those numbers again.
Yeah. The most recent poll that came out that was done by Suffolk University and sponsored by Boston Herald showed that 47% of voters in Massachusetts do not favor having casinos, and 39% do support having casinos. And that's a flip-flop from about a year ago when the numbers were just about reversed. And early on in this fight, when we started just being concerned about a casino in Winthrop, so in the Revere East Boston line, as I started to talk to people, I realized that people didn't really understand what the business of casinos was all about and what came along with casinos. Now, people don't mind, going to visit one and maybe have some good time there, but when you talk about what happens around casinos, people start to become concerned, and it's not very difficult.
What happened to kind of get that message across in your mind?
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure part of it was the work of your group, but
Absolutely.
there's more to it than that.
Well,
certainly.
when you have concerned citizens that start to speak out and understand and educate themselves, Google was our best friend. We became very passionate about protecting our communities, and as we started to spread the truth, even though the casino developers outspent all of the fights in Massachusetts, it's numbers of 50 and 80 to 1 in terms of spending, our message was correct, we were right, and we were passionate about protecting our communities, and that's what caught fire in Massachusetts. And when people just take a little scratch through that veneer of the glitz and glamour of a casino, and they see what casinos bring, voters see through it, and that's what you're seeing. The tide has turned against casinos, and I can't leave off the table the rollout that's happened here in Massachusetts. Especially here when you talk about, the Region A, the Boston region.
Right. Lots of questions
Lots
being
of
raised.
questions, absolutely. Just to go back, on November 5th, when East Boston residents voted against the casino proposal, at that point in time, there was no casino planned for Revere, just the track that exists now. And now on November 6th, well, let's forget about what happened. And let's
It's shocking, given what people had heard and understood, and everybody kind of lining up behind them. Forget about the operators themselves.
Right.
A lot of just about every public official, it seemed like, with a few exceptions, I will say, were supporting it. Has the worm turned here? Are public officials hearing you more? I mean, you see some candidates, of course, Donald Berwick, who's running for governor, was on the Democratic side, outspoken opponent. I know in the mayor's race there were one or two that were, although they didn't do so well. But
well,
would this be the first time something like this happened, where casino gambling or gambling in general had been made legal, and the potential?
Yes, actually, this would be the first time in the country that a casino law will have been repealed once we accomplish that feat in the fall.
Successful.
And what's interesting is that the people that are responsible for bringing casinos gambling to Massachusetts, to making it legal, the governor, the Speaker of the House, Mayor Menino, have all said that they don't want to have a casino near them. Chairman Crosby, who's the chairman of the Gaming Commission, has also said he doesn't want to live near a casino. Mayor Menino recently said, that the tide has turned against casinos. So I think you are seeing these politicians back away from their once, fervent support for casinos And frankly, the market is saturated. You're seeing layoffs in Connecticut, our neighboring state. New Jersey is talking about closing down one of their casinos. Even in Pennsylvania, you're seeing a drop-off of revenue that comes from casinos. So, I think the bloom is off the rose, as they say, in terms of casinos. And people have, like I said, have seen through all of this.
Well, of course, perhaps it may be true, but certainly I think it's fair to say you have some operators very nervous. In fact, MGM, who was essentially granted the license for Western Massachusetts, the one license, has said that they will not go forward, and the State Gaming Commission agreed that they didn't have to pay the fees until
That's right.
this issue was decided. So
right.
Clearly you're getting through, although, if it were to go on the ballot, I'm guessing there's a lot of money, a lot of effort that would come forth from those who support casinos
I'm
as
sure
well.
there would be.
Are you ready for that? Are you ready for a full-bore campaign?
We are. We've hired an experienced campaign manager. We're also engaging with a fundraiser. We are ready to raise money. We may not, we won't match the casino developers who have unlimited funds and resources. But what's shown to be true, was proven to be true here in Massachusetts, is that the voters are very smart. And once they understand just a little bit of what the negatives are going to come along with casinos, they reject them. And that's why you see towns like East Boston and Palmer and Milford, where they did have education campaigns that went on before the referenda votes, that they did reject them out of hand, even though they're facing some tough economic times. Casinos aren't the economic panacea that the governor once touted. He recently said on a radio program that he backed away from the statement that they were going to be the economic panacea for the state. And just over and over again, you see this, removal of the veneer. Everyone's seeing behind the curtain and realize that it's just a man operating the levers, just like in The Wizard of Oz.
Well, of course, there's some serious money at stake here for the Commonwealth as well. The fees are very expensive and spread out, and a lot of mitigation money. Those kinds of arguments won't hold sway. Jobs is still a pretty powerful argument, and I'm playing a little devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, that's fine, and I think that's fair because that's the argument that the casino operators make. The idea that casinos bring additional revenue into an area just doesn't hold water. Casinos haven't saved a single state or community in the country. You can look at places like Detroit, even our neighbors to the south in Connecticut. They've seen crime go up and property values go down after casinos have been introduced. All you have to do is go up to Niagara Falls, New York, and you look on the American side, the U.S. side, where there's a casino right there, and businesses have closed all around it. And on the other side, it's a lot better. Chip Tuttle, who's the chief operating officer over at Suffolk Downs, was asked on a TV show, listen, you're expecting to have 20,000 visitors a day. Why are you only building a 300-room hotel? And his answer was that, 21 million visitors already come to Boston every year. So those people are already spending money in the local economy. What the casino operators are hoping to do is to drain some of that money out of the local economy and take it and put it in the bigwig's pocket and take it out of state. So this idea that tourists are going to come to Massachusetts for casinos is just untrue. The casinos are coming to Massachusetts for the tourism dollars.
Well, of course, sometimes great arguments, even the facts don't get in the way of how elections turn out. If it does make the ballot and you don't succeed, will you then concede that perhaps this is what people want? And
well, clearly,
you've been
Sure. I think, clearly, if and when the voters have the opportunity to speak on it and they decide that they want to have casinos, certainly that will have been the will of the people. I think in the end, in the final analysis, the people will realize that it is a net negative, and sometimes it does take some time to realize the negative impacts overall. Sometimes it takes longer than once the initial money starts flowing. And what casino operators and everyone else needs to remember is that the people always have this opportunity. Even if we're unsuccessful this time, we can always come back another time
It's
in the
never
future.
too late.
It's
Now,
never too late.
do you have any options? Let's say the court decision goes against you.
Mm-hmm.
Will you have any options at that point to?
There's no, it's not as though we could take it to a higher court, the Supreme Court. There's a timing issue that's involved, and it's really just a state matter for the state. But what we could do, and we are considering, is turning around right away and filing another question. You see, when the SJC decides, or the Attorney General decides that a question is unconstitutional, there are usually explicit instructions on how to write the question so that it will pass constitutional
So it
muster.
could possibly just be a question of rewriting it. Of
That's
course,
exactly right.
You have to go out and get new signatures?
We'll go out and get new signatures, we'll file it again, we'll collect signatures this fall, and then the question will sit and wait until the 2016 ballot. But as you've seen, as you mentioned, the casino developers, they're not willing to gamble, right? They want us to gamble,
Unlike
right?
everybody else, right?
They want us to gamble. The House always wins, and I think they recognize that if we do have an open and honest debate, that then they're going to lose on this, and voters of Massachusetts will reject casinos.
Well, certainly an interesting political development. Again, John Ribeiro is the chair of the committee to repeal the casino deal, a ballot initiative being put forth that would ask voters to decide whether the law that was passed 3 years ago should stand. Be very interesting. Supreme Judicial Court making a decision early next month will, in all likelihood, tell the tale. John, I want to wish you the best of luck, and thanks
Thank
so
you so
much
much,
for coming
Joe.
in and joining us
Thanks for
tonight
having
and
me.
talking about it. Be watching very closely. You're watching Talk of the Neighborhoods here on the Boston Neighborhood Network. We're here tonight and every Monday night at the same time. We'll be back next week. Till then, for the entire staff and crew here at BNN, I'm Joe Heisler, your host. I want to thank you for watching. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.